There is a control tower standing at the edge of the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. It overlooks cracked runways disappearing into white nothing. No city behind it, no aircraft on it, no mission in front of it. A sign at the entrance calls this one of the most historically significant military sites in America. Most drivers on Interstate 80 pass without stopping. Most don't even know it's there. But in 1944, approximately 1,750 men reported here for the most important military mission in American history, and almost none of them were ever permitted to know what that mission was. The Bonneville Salt Flats stretch for roughly 30,000 acres west of Salt Lake City. Flat, white, alien, a surface so featureless and so open that nothing larger than a jackrabbit has anything to hide behind in any direction. No hills to observe from, no roads cutting through the middle, no reason for any outsider to stop. In the early 1940s, the Army Air Forces recognized what that emptiness was worth. Wendover Field had been operating since the early 1940s, running conventional training operations, B-17 and B-24 crews, practicing bombing runs above the salt, the white landscape below, turning every approach into the same featureless target. The base was functional, isolated, and almost entirely invisible to the rest of the country. Its runways were long enough for fully loaded heavy bombers. That last quality, the invisibility, was the one that would matter most. By 1944, a classified federal program called the Manhattan Project had a delivery problem. Scientists at Los Alamos were building an atomic bomb, two of them, in fact, with different designs requiring different release profiles. The weapon designated Fat Man was massive, oddly shaped, and demanded an aircraft modified specifically to carry it. A precise high-altitude release, and most critically, a survival maneuver so severe that the crew would need to execute it reflexively, without thinking, the instant the bomb left the bay. Rehearsing all of that required clear skies, long runways, an open range, and an absolute absence of curious observers. General Leslie Groves, the Army officer running the Manhattan Project with the authority of a small government, already had his pilot, Colonel Paul Tibbets, 29 years old, a veteran of B-17 combat missions over Europe and the first American B-29 flights over North Africa, one of the most technically precise bomber pilots the Air Forces had produced. Groves gave him the mission in broad terms and an unusual authority. He was to select the base, build the unit, and decide at his own discretion what each man under his command would be permitted to know. Tibbets reviewed candidate airfields. His documented accounts describe the decision simply. He was looking for isolation, not infrastructure. The best security, in his view, was a location that gave an outsider no reason to investigate. Wendover gave him that absolutely. Salt Lake City was 125 miles to the east. The Nevada state line was just across the road. The desert sat in every other direction, flat and indifferent, offering nothing and hiding everything. The 509th Composite Group reported to Wendover in September 1944. Approximately 1,750 men, selected for skill, told almost nothing about why. The command structure that governed them was itself classified. The 509th did not answer to the standard Army Air Forces chain. It answered to Groves, which meant, in practice, it answered to the Manhattan Project. That was the first thing nobody told them. The training began immediately and made no obvious sense to most of the men doing it. B-29 crews flew practice runs over the salt flats at high altitude, released their ordnance, and then executed a maneuver that felt unlike anything in conventional bombing doctrine. A steep banking turn, rolling hard away from the release point, putting every pound of thrust into distance. They were told it was a new safety protocol. They executed it again and again until it was automatic, horizon tilting, engines straining, the white flat desert wheeling below. Not one man in the aircraft besides Tibbets understood what the maneuver was designed to survive. The bombs they were dropping did not look like anything they had trained with before, either. Orange, roughly 6,500 pounds each, shaped like a fat, blunt cylinder, a shape that was, unknown to the crews, classified. The Manhattan Project called them pumpkin bombs, inert replicas of the Fat Man atomic device, built to the same aerodynamic profile so crews could learn the weapon's flight behavior without ever being told what the weapon was. They impacted the white salt and left their marks again and again, while the B-29s rolled away on their classified survival turn above. The aircraft themselves were part of the secret. The 509th's B-29s had been modified under a classified program called Silver Plate. Bomb bays were altered, defensive gun turrets removed to reduce weight, and fuel and engine systems upgraded. The planes looked like standard B-29s from a distance. They weren't. The ground crews who serviced them could see the differences. They were not briefed on what the differences meant. Off-duty, the 1,750 men of the 509th crossed the state line into Nevada. The gambling establishments on the Nevada side of Wendover, legal where they stood, not where the base stood, were the primary social outlet for men who had almost nothing explainable to say about their work. They played slots, drank, and said nothing because there was nothing permissible to say. The civilians serving them drinks and taking their money knew they were military. That was all anyone outside the fence was allowed to know. Back on the Utah side, letters went through censorship before they left the base. A soldier who wanted to tell his mother where he was stationed could not. A soldier who wanted to describe what he was flying could not. A soldier who wanted to say what he was training for could not, because he didn't know, and even if he had, he couldn't. The letter that left Wendover was a letter with the center removed. Just location withheld, aircraft type withheld, mission withheld, reason for everything withheld. Some of these men had been in the Air Forces long enough to know that tight security was standard. None of them had experienced security designed to operate from the inside out, where the most effective way to keep a secret was to ensure the people carrying it had never been told what it was. The aircraft that would eventually be named the Enola Gay, after Tibbets' mother, Enola Gay Tibbets, flew its training missions in and out of Wendover alongside the rest of the 509th's small fleet. It was one of roughly 15 specially configured B-29s on a remote Utah airfield that collectively represented the most consequential aviation operation in history. In spring of 1945, the 509th deployed to Tinian Island in the Pacific. The runways at Wendover went quiet. The pumpkin craters in the white salt stayed where they were. The base that had trained the mission was already becoming something without a purpose. The mission itself had not yet been flown. On August 6, 1945, Paul Tibbets piloted the Enola Gay over Hiroshima at high altitude, released Little Boy, and executed the banking turn his crews had practiced until it was reflex. 3 days later, Boxcar dropped Fat Man over Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan surrendered. The most consequential military mission in American history was complete. It had taken 9 days from first bomb to ceasefire. Wendover's reason to exist ended with the war it helped win. There was no second mission, no follow-on unit, no replacement program that needed the salt flats, the long runways, the isolation. The 509th's specific combination of aircraft, training, and classified purpose had been engineered for exactly one objective. When that objective was achieved, the base discovered what it had always been, a machine. Built around a single use, in a location chosen specifically because nothing else was there. The jet age arrived fast. By the early 1950s, the Air Force was transitioning to the B-47 Stratojet and moving toward the B-52, aircraft with entirely different performance requirements, different infrastructure needs, different training doctrine. The propeller-driven B-29 and everything Wendover had been built to support became a chapter rather than a strategy. The runways were still there. They were simply pointed at a war that no longer needed them. The isolation that had made Wendover the perfect secret now made recovery nearly impossible. There was no rail connection to a major industrial center, no navigable water, no agricultural base, no secondary economy that had grown up alongside the military mission. The Nevada side had gambling, and the gambling would survive because gambling does not need a reason to be in a desert. The base on the Utah side had the mission, and the mission was finished. The buildings stood. The control tower stood. The hangars where silver plate B-29s had been serviced sat on the edge of a runway that light civilian aircraft occasionally used and nothing larger visited. Some crew members of the 509th, by various accounts, had learned the full scope of what they'd done, not from a military briefing, but from reading newspaper headlines after Hiroshima. The men who had spent 8 months executing a classified banking turn over white Utah salt found out what they had been surviving from, in the same way everyone else did. Paul Tibbets lived until November 2007. He was 92 years old. He left documented instructions that he be buried at sea with no marked grave. He did not want a headstone that could become a protest site. The man who commanded the most secret airbase in American history and flew its defining mission asked, in the end, to leave no physical address behind. Today, the Enola Gay is displayed at the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia, under museum lighting, fully restored, labeled, seen by millions. Boxcar is at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The base that trained both aircraft and both crews is managed by a nonprofit preservation organization with limited funding, staffed largely by volunteers working against the desert heat, the salt air, and the slow pressure of time on original World War II construction. Interstate 80 runs past Wendover carrying millions of vehicles a year between Salt Lake City and Nevada. The control tower is visible from the highway. Most people do not stop. It still stands over the same salt flat, watching the same white horizon the B-29s flew over, waiting for something that already happened and left no forwarding address.